My name is Walter S. Hammond. I am 81 years old. I live, or perhaps it is more accurate to say I used to live, in a modest two-story house on the edge of a quiet suburb near Pittsburgh. The house was built in the 1960s, and while time has weathered its paint and dulled its bricks, it was a place of peace and habit, where the walls still held the warmth of voices long gone silent. My wife, Ruth, passed away 7 years ago after a slow, cruel battle with pancreatic cancer. We were married for 54 years. She was my compass and my companion in a world that has always moved faster than I liked. When she died, the world didn't slow down for me. It just stopped making sense. I taught philosophy at a small liberal arts college for nearly 4 decades. My students often joked that I could quote Aristotle with the same ease that others ordered coffee, and perhaps they were right. There's a comfort in logic, in syllogisms and dialectics, that the messiness of real life rarely affords. After Ruth's death, I found myself clinging to that logic more and more, not to solve any particular problem, but simply to remind myself that there was still some order, some structure, in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. My days grew smaller in scope, but no less full of thought. I woke each morning at 6, made myself a pot of tea the way Ruth used to, and sat on the back porch wrapped in a flannel robe, watching squirrels dart across the yard as the sun crept over the rooftops. I spent afternoons reading, sometimes rereading, the books Ruth and I had loved, and evenings listening to classical music on an old record player she had insisted on keeping, even when CD players became the rage. My son Jonathan, everyone calls him John, lives about an hour away. He is 52 now, a financial advisor, successful by most definitions, with a sleek car, and a wife who never bothered to hide the fact that she found me tiresome. We haven't been close for many years, not since the funeral, really. Ruth's death should have brought us together, but it didn't. He cried briefly at the service, made a polished eulogy that sounded as if it had been written for a client, and then vanished behind the routines of his busy, curated life. He called now and then, usually rushed, always with the tone of someone checking a box on a to-do list. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up, Dad." As though I were a rusty gate he needed to inspect once a month. John has 2 children, my grandchildren, but I haven't seen them in almost 4 years. Haley is 23 now, a veterinary student, and Dylan is 20, studying business at some school out west. I used to send them birthday cards with crisp $20 bills inside like clockwork. Last year I received my first return-to-sender envelope marked "No longer at this address." I never got a forwarding one. They're good kids, I assume, but I'm more of an idea to them than a person. Grandpa, the man in old photographs next to Grandma, the one who sends cards and who, presumably, smells like mothballs and reads the newspaper on real paper. I don't blame them. The distance wasn't just physical, it was generational, emotional, cultural. I never mastered texting. I thought emojis were a type of insect until 2 years ago. Still, I didn't mind the solitude. Not at first. There was something comforting about having the house to myself, about living among memories instead of people who only pretended to remember. I had my pension, my books, my tea, and my routines. I wasn't rich, but Ruth and I had always been prudent. She clipped coupons until the end, even when we could afford not to. Our savings were stable. I had enough to last if I was careful, and I was. I always have been. I paid off the mortgage years ago. I still drove, albeit cautiously, and went to the grocery store every Thursday at 10 a.m. when the aisles were empty. I even mowed the lawn myself until last fall, when I slipped on wet leaves and bruised my tailbone. After that, I hired a neighborhood kid to do it twice a month. Sometimes I'd get invitations from the local senior center, potlucks, bingo nights, lectures on fall prevention and Medicare fraud. I went once, out of curiosity, and never returned. The place reeked of resignation. The people there weren't living. They were waiting. I didn't want to be one of them. I didn't think I was like them. I wasn't confused, didn't forget the stove, didn't mistake the TV remote for a telephone. My hands still worked. My mind still worked. I was old, yes, but I was not gone. Not yet. Then came the winter. Not just the season, though it was a particularly brutal one, but a kind of internal frost that crept into the corners of my life. My bones ached more. The stairs seemed taller, and there were mornings when I stared out the window for hours and could not recall what I was waiting for. One day in February, I slipped on a patch of ice while bringing in the garbage bins and broke my hip. I lay there in the snow, unable to move, the cold soaking through my coat, my glasses lying crooked beside me, until a passing neighbor saw me and called an ambulance. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another month in a rehab facility, surrounded by beeping machines and the cloying smell of antiseptic. That's when John reappeared, well-groomed, cologned, dressed like an executive who had wandered into the wrong wing. He was suddenly attentive, asked about my medications, brought me books I'd never read, and promised to make things easier. At first I was grateful. I thought perhaps he had finally remembered that I was not just his responsibility, but his father. He spoke of options, of safe environments, and long-term planning. He mentioned a place upstate, peaceful, well-reviewed, close to nature. He said it would be good for me to have people around, professionals. I asked about going home. He hesitated. "The stairs are a risk," he said. "Besides, you'll be happier in a place with company. You need more than books and the sound of the refrigerator humming." I should have asked more questions. I should have read the paperwork. But I was tired, on painkillers, and I trusted him, despite everything. I still believed that blood meant something. He handed me a pen. I signed. That was the last time I saw my home for many, many months. The day they transferred me from the rehabilitation center to the nursing facility began like any other. Quiet, clinical, and sterile. A nurse I had never seen before entered my room at precisely 8:15 a.m., clipboard in hand, informing me with polite efficiency that I would be discharged that morning. I assumed I was finally going home. My heart lifted for the first time in weeks. I asked her if my son was coming to pick me up. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "Transportation has been arranged." That should have been my first clue. But I was still sore from the latest physical therapy session and was trying to navigate my way into a clean pair of pants without assistance. By the time I was wheeled out of the facility, my discharge papers in an envelope on my lap and my small duffel bag hanging from the back of the wheelchair, it was nearly 10 a.m. The vehicle waiting for me wasn't John's car. It wasn't any car I recognized. It was a non-emergency medical transport van, the kind used for patients who aren't supposed to walk on their own. The driver didn't introduce himself, only glanced at a clipboard before confirming my name and lifting me into the back seat, with the same indifference one might reserve for a broken office chair. We drove in silence. I tried to make conversation, asked where we were headed, but he only muttered north and turned up the radio. It wasn't until we passed the outskirts of the city until the skyline was a distant blur and the houses had given way to empty fields and gas stations with broken signs that I realized we weren't going anywhere familiar. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't in my pocket. I asked the driver to pull over, to let me call my son. He said, "Instructions are instructions," and stared ahead like I wasn't even there. The facility appeared like a bruise on the landscape, gray, flat-roofed, and surrounded by a high black iron fence. The sign out front said Willow Acres, in a font that tried too hard to be cheerful. The building looked more like a low-security prison than a care home. My breath caught. I told the driver there must have been a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here. He simply parked, opened the door, and wheeled me to the reception without a word. The woman behind the desk, who smelled faintly of mothballs and hand sanitizer, greeted me with the kind of tired smile that said she had done this far too many times to care anymore. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Hammond," she said. "Your son filled out all the necessary paperwork. Room 212. You'll find it's a very comfortable arrangement." I stood still, gripping the edge of the counter, my knees trembling from equal parts weakness and dread. "There's been a mistake," I said, trying to sound firm but hearing the tremor in my own voice. "I was supposed to go home. I'm not supposed to be here." She looked at me as one might look at a confused customer in a hardware store. "Your son made the decision in your best interest? Everything is taken care of? Meals are served at 8, 12, and 5. There's a bingo night every Thursday." I was escorted to my room by an orderly who kept humming to himself. Room 212 was barely the size of Ruth's old sewing room. A narrow bed, a small dresser, and a single window looking out on a patch of gravel and chain-link fence. My duffel bag was set on the bed without ceremony. The door clicked shut behind the orderly. I sat down, slowly, still half believing that someone would knock, that John would walk in and explain, apologize, tell me this was temporary, just until I got stronger. But he didn't. That night, after a tasteless dinner of overcooked carrots and something that may have once been chicken, I asked to use the phone at the front desk. The woman on duty looked at me suspiciously and said, "Phone privileges are limited to emergencies and scheduled calls. You can ask your son to call you." I explained that I didn't have my phone. She shrugged. "Then he'll call when he needs to. You'll adjust. Everyone does." I returned to my room feeling the walls close in. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my knees, trying to understand what had happened. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't a bureaucratic hiccup. This was intentional. My son had arranged this. He had signed the forms, given instructions, and deposited me here as one might deposit a check into an account they no longer plan to access. I felt the silence of the room deepen. I was 81, not 91. I wasn't lost. I didn't forget names or how to dress myself. I had been bruised, not broken. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of routines designed to sap all agency. Wake up. Take your pills. Sit in the day room. Listen to the television set at maximum volume because someone refuses to wear hearing aids. Eat meals devoid of seasoning. Go to bed at 7:30 because that's when the hallway lights dim, and no one wants to help you to the bathroom after 10. I asked again about calling my son. I wrote him letters, 5 in total, none of which received a response. I asked one of the younger orderlies, a boy named Marcus, if he could help me look up a lawyer online. He said, "We're not allowed to let residents use the internet without supervision," and disappeared down the hallway. It wasn't just abandonment, it was erasure. I was being rubbed out of my own life like chalk from a board. And then, one morning, I received mail. A letter from my bank, statements, and a notification that a change had been made to my accounts. I opened it with trembling fingers. Several large withdrawals had been made. I stared at the numbers, trying to calculate what was left, what had been taken. Over $100,000 had vanished from my savings account. Gone. Moved, it said, at the request of Mr. Jonathan Hammond, authorized financial representative. That was the moment the truth struck. Not like a sudden thunderclap, but like a slow, cold seep through my bones. My son had taken control of everything. My money, my autonomy, my home. I didn't know how. Not yet. But he had succeeded in what could only be described as a quiet coup. A theft not with violence, but with documents, consent forms, and just enough signatures to make it all legal. The betrayal hollowed me. It wasn't just the money, it was the knowledge that I had raised a man who believed I was disposable. I sat by the window that night staring at the fence, at the bleak patches of dying grass, and felt something sharp awaken in me. Not anger, not yet, just awareness. I would not be erased quietly. Whatever strength remained in my old frame, whatever clarity still burned in my mind, I would use it. Not just to escape, but to return. And when I returned, it would not be in shame or in silence. It would be with purpose. The true nature of Willow Acres revealed itself not all at once, but piece by piece. Like a puzzle someone had already completed and then scattered across the floor, out of spite. The first week, I tried to convince myself that I was merely adjusting. That perhaps the bitterness I felt was just grief in disguise. That maybe John hadn't meant to deceive me, not truly, and that I simply didn't yet understand the arrangement. But the evidence piled up quickly. No one answered my questions directly. When I asked about seeing a doctor, they told me one visited periodically, though I never once saw him. When I asked for a schedule of activities, I was handed a faded calendar from the previous month. When I requested to use the phone again, I was told that all requests needed to be filtered through your guardian, which I came to learn meant John. The term hit me like a slap. Guardian. As though I were a child again, or worse, an invalid, someone no longer capable of deciding which socks to wear or how to spend his afternoon. I didn't remember agreeing to a guardianship. No court hearing, no assessment, nothing. But I soon discovered that in the eyes of the staff, I wasn't Walter Hammond, a man who had taught generations of students how to think and reason. I was a file folder with a colored sticker and a limited medication list, scheduled for blood pressure, checks and stool softeners, and an afternoon nap. The degradation wasn't overt or theatrical. No one hit me. No one shouted. But that was the cruelty of it. It was passive, insidious, death by disinterest. When I spoke, they nodded blankly. When I protested, they smiled politely and kept moving. No one listened. No one believed that I was anything more than what my son's signature and fabricated doctor's notes claimed I was. I soon learned that my mail was being screened. Letters to friends went unanswered. The bank notifications stopped arriving. When I confronted the receptionist, she told me with thinly veiled irritation that my financial correspondence had been redirected as per instructions from your legal proxy. I asked who that was. She blinked. Your son, Mr. Hammond. You know this. And in that moment, I realized that everyone had accepted this reality, except me. I had been erased not only from my accounts and my house, but from the narrative of my own life. It was during a Tuesday dinner, while sitting across from a retired machinist named Ernest, who had lost most of his teeth and all of his memory, that I finally allowed myself to say the word. Trapped. That's what this was. Not recovery, not rehabilitation. A very gentle, very polite imprisonment. A place where people disappeared slowly, not into death, but into irrelevance. It was that same night that I met her, Alejandra. She couldn't have been more than 35. A night shift nurse's aide with soft, tired eyes and a kindness that made her seem wildly out of place in that environment. She came to check my vitals around midnight and noticed me sitting up in bed, wide awake, gripping a yellow legal pad on which I had tried to piece together a timeline of events. The documents John must have filed, the withdrawals from my account, the unexplained medical authority. Can't sleep? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. There's too much noise in my head, I replied. She hesitated, then pulled the chair closer and sat beside me. You used to be a teacher, right? I told her about my years at the college, about Ruth, about John, carefully omitting the details about the bank and the guardianship, unsure yet of how much I could trust her. She listened. Really listened. Not with the polite patience of someone trained to nod, but with the genuine stillness of someone who hadn't yet forgotten that the elderly are still people. Over the next few nights she returned during her rounds. She told me about her own family, how her grandmother had raised her, how that same grandmother had ended up in a facility not unlike Willow Acres and had died there, quietly, forgotten. I could see the wound still lived in her, and one night, after checking to make sure the hallway was empty, she leaned in close and whispered, "You don't belong here, Mr. Hammond. I know what this place is. You're too sharp. You're not like the others." I looked at her, my throat tight. "They won't let me leave," I said. "They've taken everything. My phone, my bank access, my freedom." She nodded solemnly. "Then you need someone on the outside." It was she who offered to help. I was hesitant. What if she lost her job? What if John had legal standing I didn't know about? But desperation has a way of sharpening trust. I gave her the name of my bank, told her what to ask. She nodded, wrote it down, and disappeared into the dim hallway. 3 nights later, she returned, eyes wide. "Your son has full control over your finances. There's a power of attorney document on file, medical and financial. They have you listed as cognitively impaired." My heart thudded dully in my chest. "That's not true," I said. Not even to her, but to the air, to whatever god or bureaucrat was listening. "I never signed anything like that, not knowingly." She handed me a printout, dated, notarized. My name scribbled at the bottom. My signature. But it wasn't mine. It was a forgery, clumsy and rushed. Rage began to bloom inside me, slow and hot. "I need to get out," I said. "I need to get home." Alejandra thought for a long moment. "There's a way," she said quietly. "But you'd have to trust me?" And I did. She spoke with one of the transport nurses who owed her a favor. The plan was simple, if not entirely legal. Fake a severe enough complication, chest pain, confusion, temporary aphasia, to trigger an emergency hospital transfer. Once there, request an independent assessment. Get a social worker involved. Document everything. It was a risk. If they saw through the ruse, I could be sedated or confined. But I had nothing to lose. I was already gone in every way that mattered. We waited 2 more nights to ensure the right nurse would be on call. The night it happened, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the lines Alejandra had coached me on. When the chest pains began, real or imagined, I no longer knew. I called out weakly. The response was swift. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, loaded me onto a stretcher, and carted me out under flickering fluorescent lights. As the doors of the ambulance closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of Alejandra watching from the lobby. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply nodded once and then turned away. That was the last time I saw her. But I never forgot her. And I never forgot that she had given me the first crack in the walls of my prison. A sliver of hope. The first taste of escape. The emergency room was chaos in miniature. Blinking monitors, fluorescent lights that bleached the world of color, nurses moving briskly from gurney to gurney with the practiced indifference of veterans. As the ambulance doors opened and I was wheeled in, I felt the surreal clarity of someone who knows exactly what must be done. And also how precariously the plan balances on chance. The young doctor who examined me was exhausted but alert. He asked questions I answered slowly, feigning disorientation at first until I saw his brow furrow with concern. Chest pressure, I said. Dizziness. Sometimes I forget where I am. He nodded, jotted notes, and ordered tests. My vitals were normal. Blood pressure high, but not alarming. No arrhythmia. I heard him mutter, maybe a TIA to a nurse, and for a brief moment, I feared they'd simply discharge me back to Willow Acres before I could speak to anyone who mattered. I asked for a social worker. I said it with enough tremble in my voice to sound both frightened and lucid. The nurse hesitated, but something in my insistence must have persuaded her. It was nearly midnight by the time a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes and a sympathetic face, came to my bedside. Her name was Camille. I remember this because she crouched slightly, meeting me at eye level, and said, "Walter, I'm here to help you. Tell me what you need." That moment felt like a lifeline, thrown into a dark ocean. I told her everything about the guardianship, the forged documents, the facility, the vanished bank accounts. I showed her the copy of the signature Alejandra had printed for me, pointed out its inconsistencies, explained the timeline. She listened without interruption, but I could see the skepticism flicker now and then in her eyes. The understandable doubt of someone who has dealt with more than one confused octogenarian imagining conspiracies. So I said the words I'd been saving like a last bullet in the chamber. I want an independent competency evaluation. I'm not afraid of the results, but I want someone neutral, someone who doesn't know my son. Camille blinked. That changed things. I saw her take a deep breath and say, "All right. If that's what you want, I can request it, but it'll take a day or two. In the meantime, we need to find somewhere for you to go." I refused to return to Willow Acres. I was willing to sign forms, sleep in the hallway, anything but that. She made a call, then another. After an hour, she returned with a solution: a temporary placement in a transitional elder care unit run by the hospital itself. Not a long-term facility, but a medical floor where patients wait for placement after surgery or treatment. It wasn't ideal, but it bought me time. The next morning, a young neurologist visited me. His name was Dr. Patel. He asked me a series of questions, not just memory checks, but reasoning exercises. We discussed Kant. He asked if I remembered what I had for breakfast. I replied that the eggs were overcooked and the toast soggy. He smirked. "I think we can safely say you're not suffering from dementia, Mr. Hammond," he said dryly. A psychologist followed in the afternoon, running more structured tests. I passed them all. No signs of significant cognitive decline. I saw it in her notes. Oriented X3, logical, articulate, independently functional. Camille returned 2 days later with a folder. "Your request was granted," she said. "You've been found competent. We're forwarding these documents to the county clerk's office and to the court that approved your son's guardianship." I closed my eyes and let the weight of that settle. It didn't mean I was free yet, but the foundation of John's control was beginning to crack. I asked Camille what would happen next. She explained that the court would review the new findings and schedule a hearing to challenge the guardianship order. "It'll take time," she said, "but you've taken the most important step." I thanked her and meant it. She was the first official I'd spoken to who treated me like I still had a voice. That night, alone in a hospital bed with the steady beeping of machines around me, I allowed myself to hope, not cautiously, but fully. My mind was clear. The law was on my side. All I needed now was patience. But the next morning, reality came crashing in like a thief through a window. A woman in a business suit appeared in my room without knocking, accompanied by a hospital administrator and a clipboard. She introduced herself as a representative of the Legal Oversight Committee reviewing my case. Her tone was clipped, professional, and cold. "We have some concerns about the sudden nature of your competency reversal, Mr. Hammond," she said, "and the lack of continuity in your care." She used phrases like elder vulnerability, risk of manipulation, and questionable motivations. It became clear within minutes that she wasn't neutral. She was there to stall, to slow the process, to sow enough doubt that the court wouldn't act too quickly. John had mobilized his legal team. He was fighting back. But he had underestimated me. When she left, I asked Camille for a phone. She brought me her own cell and left the room. I called a name I hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 10 years, Martin Fellman, a former student of mine who had gone on to become a civil rights attorney. He answered on the second ring, surprised, but not cold. I told him everything. He listened. When I was done, he said simply, "Give me the name of the hospital and the court that approved the guardianship. I'll take it from here." 2 days later, I had a lawyer. 3 days after that, I had a court date. And within a week, I knew I would not only walk free again, I would return with fire. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and wet. The kind of weather that made the bones ache before the day even began. I sat in the back seat of Martin Fellman's car as we drove downtown through sheets of drizzle. The city outside smudged like a watercolor left in the rain. Martin was silent, focused, his fingers tight around the steering wheel. He hadn't changed much since college, taller now, his jaw more square, hair receding slightly at the temples, but the same intelligent eyes, the same quiet fury for justice that had first set him apart in my classroom. He had been the kind of student teachers remember for life, sharp, dogged, and unwilling to look away when things were wrong. Now he was putting that indignation to work for me. As we waited in the narrow, drafty courtroom, I clutched a folder in my lap, copies of my evaluations, statements from the hospital staff, even a handwritten letter from Alejandra that she had mailed to Martin's office. She had risked everything to speak the truth. In her letter, she described what she had witnessed at Willow Acres: the mail tampering, the phone restrictions, the way staff were instructed to defer to Mr. Hammond's legal representative before granting even the smallest request. It was damning in its plainness, because it was real. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just facts observed daily and recorded by someone with a conscience. John arrived late. He came into the courtroom wearing a charcoal suit and a carefully practiced frown of concern, his lawyer in tow, a tall man with slicked back hair and a face like an unsmiling ventriloquist dummy. John did not look at me, not once, not as he entered, not as he sat down. Not even when the judge, a pale, middle-aged woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense voice, addressed me directly to ask if I understood the purpose of the hearing. I said I did. My voice was steady. My hands, folded in my lap, did not shake. The hearing began with procedural formalities, names, dates, affirmations. Then John's lawyer spoke first, asserting that while Mr. Hammond had undoubtedly shown signs of lucidity, his previous assessments had clearly indicated cognitive decline, and that the risk of exploitation or financial mismanagement remained high. I stared at the man as he spoke of me in the third person, as if I were not there, as if I were a piece of land being disputed, not a man with a mind, with memories, with anger. Then it was Martin's turn. His voice was calm, but carried iron beneath it. He spoke of forged documents, of unilateral decisions, of a son who used legal mechanisms not to protect, but to isolate and control. He cited case law. He referenced the evaluations. He read from Alejandra's letter, her words echoing in the sterile courtroom air like a quiet rebellion. When he finished, the silence was thick. The judge requested that I speak. I stood, slowly, because the hip still ached, and looked at her. Not at my son, not at his lawyer, just her. And I told her what it felt like to be buried alive in bureaucracy, to have your identity reduced to a set of false assumptions. I spoke of the humiliation of being called confused when I wasn't, of asking to call my family and being told, not today. I spoke of the food, the routines, the dead-eyed nurses, the sound of locks at night. I told her I had signed no papers knowingly, and that if I had done so under duress, misled by a son I once trusted. I said I wasn't asking for revenge. I was asking for my life back. After I finished, there was no cross-examination. John's lawyer declined to speak again, and the judge, after a brief recess, returned with her ruling. The guardianship was revoked. All powers of attorney were nullified, pending investigation. John was ordered to provide a full accounting of any transactions he had made from my accounts in the previous 6 months. The court would appoint an independent financial auditor. I was, in the eyes of the law, restored. As we exited the courtroom, Martin put a hand on my shoulder. "That's one battle," he said, "but it's not the war." I nodded. I knew what came next. I wasn't finished. Not nearly. In the days that followed, I returned to the house. My house. The one Ruth and I had built our lives in. It smelled of dust and neglect. The refrigerator was empty, the mailbox overflowing, the plants long dead, but it was mine. I stood in the living room for a long time, running my hand along the bookshelf, the spines of titles I knew by heart, the photographs of Ruth in her younger years, smiling in the garden, waving from the deck, sitting cross-legged with a book on the floor. I was home, but I was not yet whole. The financial audit uncovered what I had suspected. John had withdrawn nearly $120,000 from my accounts. Some had been transferred to his own investment portfolios. Some used to pay off credit cards. There were charges from hotels, restaurants, even jewelry stores. His lawyer claimed they were gifts, that I had authorized them, but no such authorizations could be found. We filed charges. A civil suit. Not criminal. I did not want my son in jail. I wanted restitution. I wanted the courts to put in ink what everyone else tried to smudge into gray, that what he had done was wrong. But even that was not the end. The deeper betrayal lay in how far he had planned to take it. Through the bank's cooperation, we obtained a document trail showing that John had begun the process of placing the house on the market. He had listed me as unable to manage property. He had gone to open houses. He had fielded buyers. He had quite literally been selling the ground from beneath my feet. That was when the anger crystallized. That was when I stopped feeling sorrow and started to feel strategy. With Martin's help, I began the legal process of removing John from any co-ownership documents. I reinstated all my accounts under new protections. I changed my address, my phone number, my medical proxies. I locked the world he had access to behind a steel gate of passwords and notarized forms. I updated my will. I removed his name entirely. I left a note in its place. Love is earned, not inherited. Then I sold the house. It wasn't spite. It was survival. The memories of Ruth there had begun to rot under the weight of what John had tried to do. I sold it quietly to a young couple expecting their first child. I met them only once, but I liked them immediately. She was a school teacher. He was a nurse. I left them a note in the kitchen drawer. This house saw a lot of love. May it see more with you. With the money, I bought a small apartment in a quiet development with lake views and no stairs. I furnished it simply, but with care. New furniture, new books, a new tea kettle. I even got a small cat from a shelter, a black and white runt with one ear clipped who insists on sleeping on my chest. I named him Plato. And I started writing. Not a book, just memories, stories, moments I wanted to preserve. I didn't know if anyone would read them, but it didn't matter. It felt like reclaiming something. One afternoon I received a letter. The envelope was plain. No return address. Inside was a single page. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I hope one day you can forgive me. There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I folded the letter slowly. I placed it in the back of my journal. I did not reply. Some things are beyond mending, and some wounds, when left alone, finally heal. I had believed, perhaps naively, that once the dust settled, once the bank accounts were secure, the house sold, the guardianship overturned, and the walls of my autonomy rebuilt brick by brick, that John would finally recede into the background of my life like an unpleasant memory. You grow distant from with time, not erased, but defanged by distance. I had imagined that he would vanish from my periphery, that he would take his shame and his entitlement with him, and disappear into whatever polished office and curated suburbia he now occupied, perhaps to reflect, perhaps to lick his wounds, but, most importantly, to stay gone. That fantasy lasted precisely until the afternoon I opened my apartment door to find him standing in the hallway, suit jacket wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, and posture stiff with a tension I recognized not as remorse, but as suppressed fury. Wrapped in desperation, he didn't say hello. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stepped forward, forcing me to retreat a pace, and said, I need to talk to you. There are moments when instinct rises faster than memory. Every nerve in my body stiffened. Every quiet, fragile thread of peace I had woven in my small new life snapped taut. I said nothing, merely turned my body halfway toward the door to block his view of the apartment behind me, where the cat lay curled in a sunbeam, where the smell of lentil soup still lingered in the air, where my books, my new furniture, my small, reclaimed life now lived untouched by him. I want to explain, he said, but his tone already betrayed the lie of that claim, because it was not the tone of a man seeking forgiveness. It was the voice of a man trying to retake a position he believed had only been temporarily taken from him, not forfeited. I don't need your explanation, I said, my voice low and steady, but I could already feel my pulse rising, my palms prickling with a cold sweat I couldn't stop. Everything you've done already explains itself. He shifted his weight, looked past me as though trying to see into the apartment, into whatever life he'd been forcibly removed from. You don't understand, he said. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I was just trying to... And here he paused, realizing too late that whatever sentence he had started would betray him more in its ending. It got out of hand. It got out of hand. The way a fire someone lights on purpose gets out of hand. The way a thief who keeps stealing until he's caught says it got out of hand. I let him speak, not out of generosity, but out of a kind of morbid curiosity, a desire to finally see how he would frame the narrative when pressed face to face with the man he had tried to erase. After Mom died, you were a wreck, he said. You stopped answering calls. You just sat in that house. I was worried about you. He delivered the line like a rehearsed monologue, but his eyes gave him away. They darted, defensive, not pleading, not sincere. So you had me declared incompetent? I asked, my voice still controlled, still composed despite the flames spreading slowly in my chest. You forged my signature, took my money, cut me off from the world, because you were worried? He didn't deny it. He looked away, toward the elevator at the end of the hallway. You weren't living, Dad. You were surviving. Alone. In a big house full of ghosts. The way he said it, you'd think he was doing me a favor. The way people defend euthanizing a sick animal. Kindness by coercion. You put me in a facility where I couldn't even make a phone call without your permission, I said. Where they read my mail, restricted my movements, and gave me pills I didn't need. You tried to sell my home. You drained my accounts. You took every ounce of control from me because you didn't like the way I grieved. Finally, he looked me in the eye. And what I saw there wasn't regret. It was insult. As if my refusal to accept his narrative, to see his betrayal as mercy, was an affront. You don't get it, he said, his voice rising. You're old. You're alone. What did you expect me to do? Just watch you waste away in that house? I said nothing. He stepped closer. I was trying to build something for my family. I needed help. And you had the money, the house, the savings, just sitting there, doing nothing. It was then that the final piece fell into place. Not the legal documents, or the bank statements, or even the whispered conversations I had imagined between him and his lawyer. It was the justification, the cold, dry, final twist of the knife. I was not his father in those moments. I was a resource, a stagnant asset, an inconvenience in the way of the life he believed he deserved. You were never going to use that money, he said, and now his voice had lost the veneer of concern entirely, becoming something harder, angrier. I deserved some of it. After everything I've done? I stared at him. The man I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy who had once clutched my hand on the first day of kindergarten, now a man so lost in entitlement that he had convinced himself theft was a form of redemption. You did this? I said quietly. Not because you cared, not because you feared for me, but because you thought I owed you something. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a breath, tried to reset his expression and said, Look, I'm not asking for a handout. I just need some help right now. Things are tight. Hazel's out of school. Dylan's moving back in. I raised a hand, stopped him. You're not getting a cent from me. The words came out smoother than I expected. Not now. Not ever. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like I had suddenly become a stranger. And maybe I had. Maybe I had changed in ways he never expected, become someone who no longer bent under guilt or obligation. Maybe he had hoped that if he came here, in person, with his suit slightly rumpled and his eyes just red enough, I would fold. But I didn't. I buried your mother in that house, I said. I built our life with her brick by brick. And you tried to turn it into an investment portfolio. That's who you are now. That's what you chose. He swallowed, but said nothing. I want you to leave, I added. Don't come here again. Don't write. Don't call. If I ever hear from you again, it'll be through a lawyer. His mouth opened like he might argue, might plead, might lash out, but then he saw something in my face, something immovable, and he stopped. He turned, walked back toward the elevator without another word. When the doors closed, I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the fading echo of his footsteps, and then I shut the door. I locked it. I made tea. I sat in silence, letting the storm inside me settle. And for the first time in years, I felt clean. The days after that final confrontation passed quietly, not in triumph, not in celebration, but in something heavier, something closer to solemnity. There was no feeling of victory, only a dull, persistent awareness that a chapter had ended, and another, lonelier one had begun. The peace in my small apartment was not the kind you share over dinner with someone you love or mark with laughter or music. It was a silence that asked nothing of me but honesty. Every morning I made my tea and watched the sun rise over the lake. I stopped waiting for phone calls. I stopped checking the mailbox with anticipation. I no longer wondered whether John would reach out again. His absence had become a kind of clarity. Not a wound, not anymore, but a scar I could finally stop tracing. In time, the legal processes reached their end. The audit confirmed every withdrawal, every forged document, every misused dollar. The civil court ordered him to repay a portion of the funds, though I never expected to see the money. What mattered was the ruling itself, a public record, indisputable, final. It did not bring closure, not in the way people imagine when they say the word, as though it were a clean endpoint, but it brought structure. A place to set the past down without letting it fall on top of me again. I began volunteering at a local library where they ran a literacy program for older adults. It was a strange comfort to teach again, to sit across from someone whose hands shook more than mine did and guide them through the pages of large print novels, to see their eyes widen with recognition when a sentence clicked into meaning. One afternoon, a woman named Helen asked me what I used to do. I told her about the college, about Ruth, about the house. She nodded and said, "You talk like someone who knows what endings are supposed to look like." I smiled, unsure of what that meant at the time, but the words stayed with me. Sometimes I wonder how John tells the story now, if he tells it at all, if he's found a way to spin it into something palatable, something that paints him as a misunderstood caretaker or a son who only made a mistake in judgment. I wonder if his children know, if they ask questions when his name appears in the civil registry, if they piece together the real story from the parts he tries to hide. I will never know. I no longer ask. There's a freedom in not needing answers. I kept Alejandra's letter. I read it sometimes when the nights are too quiet. Not to reopen old pain, but to remind myself that even in places designed to silence people like me, there are still voices that break through. I never heard what happened to her after I left Willow Acres. I like to believe she found another job, something better, something safer. I hope she knows what she did for me. In my will, I left the bulk of what remains to a legal defense fund for elder abuse victims. I also left a note with my lawyer, sealed, not to be opened until my passing. It's addressed to John. It says only this: I loved you. And I let you go. There is nothing more I need him to know. I suppose people expect a story like mine to end with some great reconciliation or a tearful reunion. It doesn't. That's not what life gives us. Not always. Sometimes the only justice you get is the right to live the rest of your days without further harm. Sometimes silence is the truest form of dignity. And in this quiet, I have built something small, something solid. I have a cat who waits for me to come home. I have books that still surprise me. I have tea every morning and walks by the lake in the evening. I have a mind that remains my own. And that, after everything, is enough.